We are talking about pricing, and we're talking about determining value of a home that is about to be listed.
You found the Real Estate Law Podcast, because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. If you're a real estate professional or looking to build real estate expertise, then welcome to the conversation and discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com.
Welcome to the Real Estate Law Podcast. I am Jason Muth, and we're once again here with attorney, broker, Rory Gill.
Welcome. It's been a while. How are you, Jason?
Yeah, it certainly has. Yeah, we're just commenting about all the different vehicles that are going by in both of our current workspaces. I think we're in the flight path here where I'm coming from, which is in City Point and Southie. You mentioned today is street sweeping day, along with all the trucks that seem to go by your office on A Street in Southie. But that's city living, right?
Yep. So you'll hear all the street sweepers, all the trucks, all the rain. It's a good day for recording a podcast.
Isn't it? Yeah. We haven't exactly gone into the studio or a walk-in closet where there's tons of hung clothing nearby to really muffle the sound. We're just going straight at it, taking it to Zoom, where we're coming from two different rooms, and hopefully the knowledge will supersede some of the audio issues that surround us. Not that they're really issues. I mean, these days it's so much easier to record, isn't it? I mean, you used to have to bunker yourself away in a studio, but everyone's just so used to these Zooms where you just turn the camera on and go.
The noise makes it authentic.
It does. Well, today we are going to be looking into the current and kind of into the future. And I brought the kaleidoscope of the future. It just happened to be on the table in the background. So I thought that, I know exactly. Yeah, we have all these things hanging around the house these days. We are talking about pricing, and we're talking about determining value of a home that is about to be listed. And I've mentioned the future because, you have to see where the market is today, but also where it's headed. It's a careful dance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're going to take a look at, setting your home's value. It's the first thing that we get asked by any seller client, even buyer clients, what exactly is the place worth? And it's more of an art than an exact science, but we can walk through exactly how you'd come to a good understanding of your home's value. It's a multi-part process. It's never 100% perfect because ultimately your house is worth what people are willing to pay for it. But we can come up to a pretty good estimate of what that is.
Right. That's like any commodity, right? If there's no buyers, then you got to lower the price or figure something out. Something is worth as much as someone's willing to spend. If there's a lot of buyers, well, then it's probably worth more than you thought it might have been worth. And, we'll talk about current market. We'll talk about how you go forward with comparative market analysis for property. I could share some personal stories as well to try to make it a little more relatable. But why don't we start with, you get a phone call or inquiry from somebody that saying, listen, I'm thinking about listing a property. Can you help me figure out what it's worth? Like, what should we list it at? What are your next steps as a broker?
So the first thing you want to do is always understand their reasoning for selling in the first place. That's how you can help them out. The purchase price and what they sell it for is kind of a byproduct of that, and then just the market conditions overall. And it's going to be an easier job to put together a really good accurate price if you're familiar with the market and you've been paying attention to the trends. Of course, you can do an analysis for something out of your home market somewhere else and come to a well-informed decision. But the closer you are to the pulse of the market, the easier it's going to be to put together an understanding of the home's value. Kind of just looking at how that works overall, when appraisers go out there to come up with the official home valuation for you, they generally use a few different methods. There are three big methods. One is taking a look at what the rental income is going to be and then reverse engineering what a good purchase price would be for the property. That's pretty akin to business valuations.
Commercial property though?
Yeah, so that's a preferred method for commercial as well. And then the other method, which is rarely used, but sometimes makes sense in rural areas, is the cost to rebuild. How much would it cost to just rebuild that property? That kind of presupposes that the land itself is not the main point of the value.
If your barn caught fire, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of one way. And even when they take that one into consideration, it's never the guiding light. It's not really the final arbiter of what the property value is, but they go through that calculation so that it informs the overall value. It's often those two that I mentioned together, although I'll tell you they're not regularly used for small residential real estate. The rental method and the replacement method, they often go hand in hand together for commercial and larger property analyses to inform the value. But the key area we're going to talk today is for smaller residential, we pretty much only use the comp method, the comparable method, where we just take a look and see what other similar houses sold for in the recent history.
So the comp method does not mean go to Zillow and see the Zestimate and then just send that over to you, right?
No, but a lot of agents will take a look the other way and pretend that that's of no value. I disagree for two reasons. One, they are working on the comp method, the Zillow Zestimates and the other models that are out there. So they are somewhat informed by the same things that a real estate agent's going to look for when they do a more professional estimate. And they're also important to know because consumers and buyers in the market are going to reference that. We can pretend that they won't, but those of us who are working in these markets know that buyers are going to look at them. So I try to ignore this estimate when I do my home valuation until the very end, but it's something that I don't ignore altogether. It does hold value. But yes, there are many more steps. Zillow does not know the interior of your home. It doesn't know all the details of your home. It doesn't know the history of it, but it is a starting place for a lot of consumers when they're looking at homes, and people track their estimates to know how, as if it were hard and fast on their spreadsheets to know what their home is worth.
It's hard not to. I mean, I do, but I realize that it's just an estimate. It just kind of gives you a ballpark. But, Zillow has no idea if I just replaced the hot water heater with a tankless system, or I just replaced the roof, or I just renovated the kitchen. They don't know those things, to your point about, what's inside. They're using comps from the rest of the market, the neighborhood, the direction. But it is hard to ignore that. I mean, rarely are you going to find a buyer or a seller these days that doesn't at least have that number in their head. If you find those folks, they're not super informed unto themselves. I mean, maybe they're, older and technologically they just, don't take a look at what's on the internet. But, younger buyers my age, we're all looking online.
And I'm not one of the brokers that will tell you that the Zestimate is completely valueless. It's not. They have been getting better year after year at their algorithms. So it is something to take a look at, but it doesn't replace doing the work and doing the hard work of taking a look at of knowing the market and taking a look at what's out there.
Okay. Now, what are some other things that you would have a look at, with the comp method? How do you pick the comps that you are going to use for a potential client?
So you want to get as similar as possible, but still be able to find enough data to work. So if you have, an oceanfront mansion that's the only one of its kind, it's going to be a very difficult job to pull really decent comps for that property just because they don't exist. But if you're looking at a neighborhood in Boston with a standard size condominium unit, you'll probably have plenty of comps to work with and give you a much more detailed picture of what's out there. So the property type is going to really matter there. When I'm looking for comps, I'm looking for things that are similar in location, as close to the property itself as possible is great. That's in many ways, the key variable. But we also want to look at properties that are of similar size. We don't want to just take a property that's twice the size and cut the price in half. That's not how it works. In Boston, we have a diminishing return per square foot. So a property that's half the size is going to be worth more than half the value of a similar situated comparable. We also want to take a look at what amenities it has, because those are some of the things that are going to be outside the statistics. We have the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and square footage, but we want to also take a look at some of the things that are outside the core calculations. Roof deck, views, the level of the home that it's on, number of parking spaces, things that are a little bit outside of those core metrics. And then there's the subjective angle of it, the comparing the condition of the property. And we do that by looking at photos and reading through the different listings that are out there. But we want to find properties that are as similar as possible, knowing that we'll never find, or rarely ever find, the perfect comp to set the market.
Now, do you welcome feedback from a potential seller? Do you want them to say, hey, this one's sold or that one's sold, have a look at that? Or is it, you're looking at the same information yourself anyway, since you have, far more detailed tools?
Sure. I certainly welcome the input. The discussion about setting up a sale price is a conversation to have. It's a two-way conversation that we want to have. But as a broker, I want to have a really clear picture first, so that I can educate the homeowner just to what's out there, and then absolutely welcoming input from them, but it has to be grounded in reality. There are people who you can distort statistics and calculations out there to fit any end. So it's a matter of knowing what's out there and walking through the different things that are out there. And that's one of the reasons I also don't look at just sold comparables. That's the core. So I'm putting together a market analysis to set the value of a particular property. I want about 12 comparables. That's what I work with. But maybe 6 to 8 of them are going to be recently sold in the past few months. I also want to take a look at a few properties that are on the market now. That's informative to let us know what other homes would be competing against that are in a similar situation. And I also want to take a look at some properties that failed to sell, properties that were pulled off the market, they expired, or their listing was withdrawn or canceled. Because that tells me too a little bit about what to avoid out there. And when you sit down with somebody and, as a two-way conversation, you can just kind of chart down on a piece of paper, at what price point, what happens for each property. So if a property is priced a little bit lower, you can draw the trend to show that the days on market is likely going to be lower. And those properties that are priced a little bit too high, those are the ones that are more likely to be withdrawn or canceled. But you need enough data to draw trends. You need enough data to show it. But I do like to look at all the different property types.
Yeah. And we're kind of in a weird spot right now. When people are listening to this, who knows, everyone might be vaccinated, or things might have gone terribly wrong with the vaccine. Who knows? But I just think, it was literally, we're recording this just when the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was announced just a couple days ago. So, we're expecting numbers to go up dramatically in terms of number of people vaccinated and maybe things getting back to the normal or close to normal that remembered. But I say that because, many months ago, before the holidays, before the election, before vaccines were out, I think people's mindset was very, very different. We heard it over and over. The cities were dead. Everyone was not going to move to the cities. Everyone wanted to move in the suburbs. And then we saw all the craziness that is happening at suburban homes just because of the inventory issue. But bring this up because something that might not have sold in the city back in October, November, now, who knows? Directionally, is the city back? Are buyers back here in Boston and Seattle and Portland and New York and other places around the country? That's kind of bad info right now. It's a fact that 6 months ago it didn't sell, but maybe you relist it again in a different climate where there might be more confidence, both medically, health-wise, consumer confidence. Rates have not skyrocketed by any means during that period of time. Maybe you throw things like that back on the market at the same price and see what happens, 6 months later.
This is when it becomes a legitimate challenge, even for the most professional appraiser, to determine value. If there are trends that are so persistent upward in one direction over time, it's tough for the appraisers to actually keep up with the comps. You may have several offers for the same property at the same high price. And that demonstrates by traditional market standards that people are willing to pay that much for the home, so it's worth that. But appraisers still may fall short just because the comparable data doesn't exist. In these situations, there are times when appraisers are anxiously waiting for new properties to close so they can go back and look at more recent sale prices so they can support a higher appraisal. And that's common even for the most professional appraiser. And this is why real estate agents also need to have a good pulse in the market. If we're in a pretty level era, then the comp analysis is near perfect. But it's understanding what exactly is going on in the market will help you either round down or round up the data you get from the comps. And I mean, with your micro neighborhood too matters. What's happening in this past year was very different in Dorchester and South Boston versus suburban communities that had a renewed sense of interest. That the market trends were very different in those areas. And this year, if things reverse, they'll be very different the other way. But those are things that a professional agent will understand.
And correct me if I'm wrong, which is often that I'm wrong, but an appraiser is beholden to the bank, even though the buyer is paying the money, right? Because basically the bank wants to make sure that the money they're lending is the right amount of money, that they're not lending for property that, is worth, much different from what somebody's willing to pay for it. I was going to say, the appraiser is looking backwards. How much, and actually it's maybe to our question, how much of the appraisal that the bank is doing to make sure that the underwriting is correct. How much of the appraisal is forward-looking versus how much looks at what has just happened?
Appraiser will note the market conditions as to whether things are increasing or decreasing or staying the same. But largely, it's past-looking, seeing what happened recently, and they'll reach back only as far as they have to come up with 3 or 4 comparables. But the more unique the property type, the fewer comps there are available in the market, which means that they may be reaching back for older sales, which makes the data even more out of date for more unique properties. For commodity properties, I don't mean that negatively, but homes that are pretty similar to their neighbors, there may be a lot more comps, which will provide more updated data, which will allow for higher valuations for appraisers. But you're absolutely right. So the appraiser is coming up with a property value. Their role in the transaction is just to make sure that the bank is not overextending itself and that they're not lending out too much money on an asset that will be underwater shortly after the sale. So that's the situation that the appraiser is trying to avoid. But when people are doing comp analyses, you also have the seller's agent, and they're doing the same analysis to come up with a listing price that's reasonable, that is likely to interest a number of buyers. Then you also have a buyer doing the same analysis just to make sure they're not overpaying. So you have the buyer, seller, and the lender all hiring professionals to come up with a valuation, and they can be way off from each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you get your valuation, and then it goes into pricing strategy, which is going to be a whole separate podcast discussion. So we'll table that for then. Could I share a little anecdote? I get to tell a little story now?
That's your job here.
Excellent. Okay. So my first condo, which was here in South Boston, when it came time to sell it, I was woefully undereducated as to what was happening in the market. I knew that the direction was going upward, but I wasn't super into real estate at the time. This was before any of the investment properties that we purchased. But I remember I went back to the person with whom I bought the house, and I said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to sell." This is 10 years later. Do you want the listing? And his wife, I think wife at the time, but his wife, took the listing. We're working on a price. She came to me as to what she thought it was worth, and I was like, "Okay, that sounds good." Typical price analysis. All the homework that you just said that the really diligent agents will do. And then, this is one of those tips that I kind of introduced into the whole conversation that I literally heard from talking to a neighbor. Well, we had a second floor condo in a renovated triple decker. My next door neighbor, legitimately next door, also second floor, just happened that they were also about to list their property because they, I think, were pregnant or just about to move out to the suburbs and start a family. And the price they came to was $20,000 more than we were planning on listing for. And I knew that our unit was nicer. Just because I knew the building, knew when it was renovated. And I was like, so I went back to my agent. I was like, they're listing the same unit next door for 20K more. What do you want to do? She upped the price immediately. So we also listed for 20K more. And this was almost 8 years ago this time. I remember there were like 40 people at the first open house. So you talk about these crazy open houses happening today. It's been happening for a long time, at least in this market. Had an over asking offer immediately, like after that first open house. So like, had I not heard that or just chit chatted with my neighbor, I don't think we would have gotten that little bit extra money at the very end. And that buyer ended up falling through, but then we got another backup offer immediately at the asking price. So, who knows if a lower asking price would have led to a bidding war, but I have a feeling that just literally that conversational tip that Zillow didn't know about got me 20K more.
Well, that's why when I look to set a sale price, I look out and don't just look at what's been sold in the market, look what's currently on the market. You may not always catch wind of what's about to be on the market, but if you take a look at what you're competing against that weekend for open houses, you're going to revise your sale price from what the historical comps say, because that's the heat of the moment. That's what you're actually going up against. So your agent did the right thing there by modifying the list price when new data presented itself.
Yeah. Why weren't you my agent at that one?
I wasn't an agent at the time.
Maybe that's why you were the attorney though.
Yes, I remember when we sold it, you were away in Hawaii for vacation without me, but that's a side story.
Okay, I guess I kind of remember that a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole separate podcast conversation.
Right.
All right. So, Rory, let's put a bow on this one. Determining the home's value. What are 3 quick things that people should take away and remember from this podcast?
This is data driven. So look at the data that's out there. You have a lot to mine through, but you want to just be as objective as possible, because hoping and thinking that your place is extra special doesn't pan out. So take a look at the data that's out there. Be agile. Things change. New data presents itself, and it could be good data or bad data for your situation. But adapt yourself to things that come through. And then remember, what we're coming up here is the value of your home. There are strategies that we can get to, and we will get to in a future podcast, about whether or not you should list your home for less than it's worth, more than it's worth, or exactly what you think it's worth. But you want to come up with a clear, sober number of what you think your property is worth.
All right. So hope is not a strategy. Trust the data. Mm-hmm. And then listen to the next episode about pricing strategies.
That's correct.
Right?
So that rounds us out pretty well.
Okay, good. Well, thanks again, Rory. So once again, this is the Real Estate Law Podcast. Rory, where can we find you?
I am at NextHome Titletown, NextHomeTitletownRealEstate.com, as well as UrbanVillage Legal, UrbanVillageLegal.com.
Okay, great. And once again, my name is Jason Muth. We really appreciate you listening to the Real Estate Law Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
This has been the Real Estate Law Podcast, because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. We're powered by NextHome Titletown, Greater Boston's progressive real estate brokerage. More at nexthometitletown.com. And UrbanVillage Legal, Massachusetts Real Estate Council, serving savvy property owners, lenders, and investors. More at UrbanVillageLegal.com. Today's conversation was not legal advice, but we hope you found it entertaining and informative. Discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.